Hi, friends. Here's my new baseball book, my second, called Diamond Duels, a quick pick inside, which we'll take a look at. As you can see, that's Greg Maddux and Tony Gwynn. Probably a good thing that we can't hear what Greg Maddux is saying because it probably wouldn't be appropriate. My first baseball book is Last Time Out. I did that originally in 2005. I did an updated edition in 2022, which the original version had 25 players. I increased that to 43 players. And the final chapter is about my son's very first major league game. So that was kind of a nice way to wrap that book up. Greetings, Casey Stengel Nation. I'm delighted to share my new book, Diamond Duels. I wish I could have interviewed Casey. That'd be a book. Pretty cool picture, I thought, of him with the shades. We don't think of guys in those days having sunglasses like that. He looks like a pretty cool dude. I don't know if you can read the comment. It says, I was not successful as a ball player, as it was a game of skill. Baseball started for me in high school. I got a win throwing a single pitch. That's how good I was. Not really. Second game of the season, I came in, bases loaded, threw one pitch. A guy hit a mile-high pop-up. He was almost to second base by the time they caught it. We came up and got 7 runs. So I got the win. And as I say, haven't done a day's work since. Despite my coaching, my son made it to the majors. That's his baseball card when he was with the Pirates. This to me was one of the most interesting stories in the book Diamond Duels. One of the things that I was able to kind of track down that I'd never read anywhere else. This is a bit about Christy Matheson. As I'm sure you guys all know, he was one of baseball's early heroes. Tall, handsome, college-educated pitcher for the Giants, the most respected figure in the game. This is where it got interesting. When he retired, Matheson actually covered the 1919 World Series for the New York Times. Though there were all kinds of talk about the series being fixed, Matheson never wrote that for the Times. So I have a few quotes here from his dispatches that he sent in on the series, and I'll get into that in a little more here in just a bit. He wrote, there was too much betting on this series for the good of baseball, and disgruntled gamblers can start disagreeable rumors. The odds in this past series would have reflected it, if there had been any truth in the reports. Baseball is honest and will stay honest in spite of the abuse it has taken from time to time. Now, he actually knew better. I'll get into that in a minute. In the first place, Matheson continued, there is the future of a player in a series of this sort to figure on, and there would be too many men to fix to do it successfully. There is no one man on a team, no matter who he is, who can throw a game. No pitcher could guarantee to throw a game. Soon as he started to go bad, he would be ousted to the showers. Even the fans know enough about baseball to holler, take him out, as soon as a twirler begins to display signs of weakness. There's a word we don't use anymore for our pitchers, twirler. In the first place, it would cost too much. The difference between winning and losing in the last series meant a difference of $2,000 per man. In addition to this, any one of them would be risking his whole future in baseball. Once found out, no player could work in the big league again. Well, he was right about that, as we know. Now, this particular clip is, I'm sure some of you have read the great book by Lawrence Ritter, The Glory of Their Times. Have any of you guys read that? Oh, I guess if everybody's muted, I couldn't hear. Sorry. Well, anyway, after Mr. Ritter, I believe, had passed on, he handed his tapes of the interviews that he'd done with all these different players. One of the players he talked to, and very important one, was Richard Rube Marquardt, also a Hall of Fame pitcher. He was also Christy Matheson's roommate for a good bit of his time when he was with the Giants. And although in Mr. Ritter's book, he edits what Mr. Marquardt has to say about Christy Matheson, It did make it onto a YouTube special that they did on the glory of their times, where evidently they just took the audio tapes and put them on YouTube. So you could go on there and listen to the whole thing if you like. Well, the first one I heard was Rube Marquardt. Listen to what he said about Christy Mathewson. Keeping in mind now, the series he covered was the 1919 series.
As the new century dawned, baseball would come of age. It became a major sport in the schools and colleges of the nation. The Brooklyn School of Connecticut posed for their team photograph, and their most prominent member was not a player, but their man, 17-year-old Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He moved immediately to the New York Giants after graduation, and all at once the game received a new respectability. To see the college boy play. Anderson's roommate for 8 years was Richard William Root, because sports writers likened him to the legendary Rube Waddell. Mathewson was called Big Six because he was over 6 feet tall. He was great-grandfather. He was a wonderful father. During the incredible World Series of 1905, the Giants and the Philadelphia Athletics.
I hope, did everybody hear that? He'd seen him lose as much as $700-800 in a night. And in today's terms, that would be roughly $29,000 in a night. This was a revelation to me. Now, if you've all seen the movie 8 Men Out, you may remember that the filmmaker, John Sayles, actually cast himself as the sports writer Ring Lardner in the film. And the sports writer that they had playing the role was a journalist named Studs Terkel, who played the role of Hugh Fullerton, who was the guy who broke the story the next year. Now, in the film, you see Lardner and Fullerton talking to the manager of the Black Sox, Kid Gleason. But in actuality, that was Christy Mathewson. Now, the two of them sat side by side. They shared hotel rooms for the whole series, and they each kept a separate scorecard to mark questionable plays, but had never made it into the New York Times.
As the new century dawned, baseball would come of age.
Sorry about that. We'll go to the next screen here.
As the new century dawned, baseball would come of age.
All right. As I said, it's Christy Mathewson, not Ring Lardner, who kept the separate scorecard. This is a clip from 8 Men Out. Pretty interesting. Sorry about that. Well, I see I have some chat notes here. Let me see if I can get to them. Well, I apologize if you couldn't hear the audio. Kevin, was it bad?
It was in and out.
Okay.
I had already seen it at 10 minutes to 7, so I
You knew it.
knew what was going on.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, I apologize. Basically, what it was
when you're sharing between 15 people,
yeah.
it's going to be as good as the weakest as the weakest link. So
Okay.
that's fine.
Well, I apologize for that, everybody.
No big deal. Thank you.
If you'd like to hear it, it is on YouTube, The Glory of Their Times. And it's an hour program narrated, as you could hear there very well, by Alexander Scorby. And the first guy on there is Marquardt. And he says he was a wonderful guy, but he loved to gamble. And he had $1,000 in his pocket with him all the time. He had a pair of dice, a deck of cards. He'd play any game. He said he'd seen him lose as much as $7,000 or $8,000, or $700 or $800, sorry, in a single night, which in these terms translates to $28,000, $29,000. And this is the turn of the century, so that's a lot of money. Okay. Well, this particular information was really the thing that sparked me. My son was playing in the Dominican Republic. His pitching coach on the team, John is the first baseman. His pitching coach was a guy named Phil Regan, who you might remember as the Vulture. He was 15-1 in the 1966 season, kind of scarfing wins from Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale. And Sandy Koufax gave him the nickname the Vulture. So he and John were going to go play golf. So I thought, well, let me look some things up about his career so John would have some things to ask him about. So I found this site called StatHit. And the first thing I happened to see, I just thought, well, let's look up Stan Musial. He had a 20-year career, terrific player. And on StatHit, they list every single at-bat every player has ever had. So I looked, and Stan Musial faced Warren Spahn 356 times in their 20-year careers, which was amazing to me. I mean, that's almost a whole season's worth of at-bats against just one guy. And he did well. He hit 321 against Spahn, 10 points below what his career average was, but he did hit 15 home runs off him, which was the most he hit off any pitchers. So that was the initial idea for Diamond Duels. Once I looked at that stat head, I thought there might be some other things here that are interesting. And I think there sure were. Okay. Did Dizzy Dean face the Babe? As you can see, this is in spring training. You can see the palm trees in the background. But he actually did face Babe Ruth in Babe's final season. Babe didn't have much success against him. Dizzy was at the top of his game. In fact, he hit a home run in one of the games that they played against the Boston Braves. That was Babe Ruth's final season, of course, 1936. One of the things I was able to find in the book was, kind of iconic moments. Satchel Paige final game, which was when he was 59 years old, pitching against the Boston Red Sox in the final game of the season for the Kansas City A's. Mel Ott's very first home run, which was an inside the park home run at the old Polo Grounds. Cy Young's final appearance on a mound, in which he gave up, believe this, 8 consecutive hits to chase him from the mound. I think it was in the 7th inning. He had a lead. He was, he'd already won 511 games. He was old. He was out of shape. He'd been released earlier that season. And it just all came apart. 8 consecutive hits. Honus Wagner's final home run, which was off Christy Matheson. So there's a lot of little tidbits like that I think a real baseball fan would enjoy. This ought to get some reaction in New York City, I imagine. Ted Williams versus Joe DiMaggio, who has the edge? Two of baseball's greatest outfielders, Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio, were in constant competition. Who was better? It's a great debate that might have been shaped by New York sports writers. Why do I say that? Did you know that Williams won 2 Triple Crowns and didn't win the MVP either season? And one time he lost to DiMaggio, which is understandable. They won the pennant. He's a terrific player. Williams' stats were a lot better. But the one that surprised me was Yankee reliever Joe Page, who had 14 wins in relief on a team that won the pennant by 12 games. He got more first place votes than Williams. He got 7 first place votes. Ted only got 3. Something seems wrong with that picture. If you're a believer in war, and I know not everybody is, it's Ted by a landslide, 123.1 to Joe's 78.1. What do you think about that? Also, did you know that Joe led the league in errors by an outfielder twice? Once he had 17 errors. The next season he had 15 errors. That seems like an awful lot of errors from an outfielder. And the New York media never seemed to mention that. I spent a fair amount of time reading New York Times coverage and a few other papers of baseball in those days. And, excuse me, DiMaggio was very picky about what people said about him, what they wrote about him. If you wrote something critical, he just wouldn't talk to you. And of course, in Boston, Williams was at war with the Boston press. They'd write stuff like he didn't go home to see his mother in the off season. His wife delivered a baby and he was off fishing. Of course, she was several weeks premature. I mean, they were brutal. And of course, he gave it right back to them. So one of the things you'll see in the book, it's a fairly long chapter. I used a lot of quotes from Arthur Daly, who was a columnist for the New York Times, who had a wonderful relationship with Ted Williams. And it makes you wonder, had Williams been treated by the press a little bit better, and some of it, of course, was his own fault, how that might have changed things. Maybe a couple of more MVP awards. Who knows? This was an interesting thing that I found out. Did you know the great Hank Aaron started his career versus Don Drysdale just 1 hit in his first 23 at-bats? Once he figured him out, he hit .292 the rest of the way, clubbing 17 home runs, the most he hit off any pitchers. Hitters can learn too. And that was an interesting story. There was a column that was in the New York Times where Drysdale was talking about pitching to Aaron. And one of the first times he faced him, Sal Magley, the pitching coach, made him knock him down twice. Now, the funny thing is, all those at-bats, he never had a hit by pitch, but he'd knock him down just about every at-bat. And Aaron figured it out. This was a revelation to me. Whitey Ford handled with care. New York Yankee ace Whitey Ford had 73 lifetime starts against the Chicago White Sox, only 42 against the arch rival Boston Red Sox. Why? Now, I looked at the team's records for the duration of his career. There were a couple years that the Red Sox were really bad, but generally their records were very comparable. So the only thing that I can figure is Whitey had a 6.16 ERA in Fenway Park, and there were some seasons he didn't even start a game there, which is kind of shocking when you think about it. Here's the Yankees coming to Fenway Park, coming to Boston for a weekend series, and Whitey doesn't pitch. That surprised me. Also, he didn't win 20 games until they got Casey out of there and brought in Ralph Houck, and Whitey started pitching, every 4th day. Also, another thing about Whitey, which was surprising, he never pitched a deciding World Series game after pitching Game 4 in the 1950 season, his rookie season. never a Game 7 start. He warmed up a couple times, most notably in the 1956 World Series against the Dodgers. They had him warming up in the first inning. Casey, at the last minute, decided to pitch Johnny Cucks, and he had him warm up because Cucks got a couple guys on base the first inning, but that was it. He also warmed up, I think it was in the 6th or 7th inning in the famous 1960 game with the Pirates in Game 7. But he never pitched a Game 7. And if you watch Yankeeography, which I'm sure some of you have, there's countless players that come on and say, oh, if we had one game to win, we'd want it to be Whitey Ford. Well, management didn't feel that way. This was interesting. Which player hit the most home runs off one pitcher? And it turned out to be Duke Snider, who reached Robin Roberts for 19 home runs. That was the most of any player off a single pitcher. Willie Mays was next with 18 off Warren Spahn. And Spahn actually, and some of you may know this, gave up Willie's very first home run. Growing up in New Hampshire and being Polish, Karl Jastrzębski was one of my favorite players, if not my favorite player. So, of course, I had to look up his records once I got onto StatHead. Yaz was great, except against Darrell Knowles. Now, you may remember Darrell Knowles, left-handed reliever, pitched for the Senators, pitched for the Cardinals, a couple different teams, maybe the A's, I think. Boston's Karl Jastrzębski was a surefire Hall of Famer. There was one pitcher he could not hit, well-traveled lefty reliever, Darrell Knowles, who held Yaz to a lifetime mark 2 for 26, 0.77. And I think he might have got hit in his next to last at bat. So just think about what that was like. And several of those were the final at bat of the game. So imagine you're the Boston manager. You got Knowles on the mound. You got Yaz due up. You're down a run or maybe two. Are you going to let him hit? You going to bench a Hall of Famer? You know, it kind of made you think about this kind of stuff. Yaz hit 299 lifetime against righties, 244 against lefties. But my first favorite ball player. This was fun researching this. Who were baseball's best 3-4 combos? Ruth and Gehrig, Mantle and Maris, Willie Mays and Willie McCovey, Hank Aaron and Eddie Matthews, Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz. Well, looking at the numbers for the time that they spent together, the actual pair that had the best percentage of home runs was David Ortiz and Manny Ramirez. Maris and Mantle, even though they got tremendous amount of publicity, really weren't all that great. They had maybe 3 years, maybe 4 that were impactful, and Maris declined rapidly. And one other thing that I noted that maybe somebody there has an idea why, Mantle didn't hit doubles, and neither did Maris. That was a really weird thing. I mean, you'd see Bobby Richardson hit 33 doubles, or Tony Kubek hit 28 doubles, or Elston Howard even hit, 28, 29 doubles. Moose Skowron would have, high double figures in doubles. Mantle have 10, 5, or 15 rather. I think he had 1 year he had over 20, but rarely did. And I know some of it might have been his legs, because, he obviously had a lot of leg trouble. But Maris was in the same category. And I don't know if it was just because it was such a short right field in Yankee Stadium, 296 down the line. I don't really know why. I've asked a lot of baseball people, and they seem puzzled by it as well. Usually home run hitters hit doubles. This was a fun one. Here's a story I bet you don't know. Detroit's Harry Heilman, who was a teammate of Ty Cobb, won American League batting titles in 1921, 1923, 1925, and 1927, every other year. This is the thing that was cool that I didn't know about. In 1925, he was, I think, third in the batting race going into the final day. he collected 6 hits in an end of the season doubleheader to win the batting title. I think Tris Speaker was the one who was leading when he went in there. In 1927, he upped that by 1, collecting 7 hits in an end of the season doubleheader to win his 4th and final batting crown. Now, of course, we make a big deal about Ted Williams getting 6 hits and 8 at bats in 1941 to hit 400, which is wonderful. But here's Harry Howman getting 1 hit more than Ted did, and it almost got him to 400. He hit into a double play his final at bat, so he ended up at 398. But he could have hit 400 again, and he had done that earlier. Guy we don't know a lot about, but a terrific hitter. Meet the cast of Diamond Duels. There's information about all these guys in the book, all these all-stars and many more. There's a chapter on Lefty Grove versus Sandy Koufax. Who would you take for a career? A long chapter on Pete Rose. Should he be in the Hall of Fame or not? I had a chance to interview Rose a couple of different times, and it was fascinating. How anybody could not like the guy if you sat and talked with him one-on-one, that'd be on me. I mean, he was hilarious. Mickey Mantle, of course, there's stuff about him. Pedro Martinez, this is a little known stat maybe. In 1999, when he had his Cy Young Award winning season and he pitched in the All-Star game in Boston, which I go into in some detail, he allowed just 9 home runs. Pitched 240 something innings and had 300 and something strikeouts. Probably the greatest single season by a pitcher in the modern era, I would think. I've got a chapter on Tony Gwynn, Wade Boggs, Rod Carew, and George Brett. Who got them out? We know they were all great hitters. They won lots of batting titles and so on. Who were the ones that got them out? They didn't hit 500. Somebody must have. I'd be glad to take your questions if you have any. Thank you, friends, for your attention. For me, writing Diamond Duels was as much fun to write as I hope it is for you to read. You love the game of baseball, at least the way it used to be played, and care about the men who brought it life for all of us, as I know all of you do. I sincerely hope you enjoy this book. I also invite you to check out my Substack. I write a 5-day-a-week Substack on all sorts of things, including baseball. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. Thank you so much for your attention. Karen. Oh, gotta unmute you.
That helps. As far as Pete Rose is concerned, didn't he give a lot of, he didn't give a lot of facts, or more rumors. So when you're looking at,
When they interviewed him, you mean about the gambling and all that? Yeah, he tried to kind of skate through it, but the evidence was just so overwhelming that it didn't really matter. One of the things I thought was interesting was when he came back in Atlanta. If you remember, they had the all-century team in Atlanta at the All-Star game, and I was there. And if you remember, Jim Gray, really got up in his face, tried to get him to, confess and all this, which we didn't know about. There was a press conference for him down underneath the stadium, so we didn't know any of this was going on. So when Pete finally came down, he sat down, he was his usual charming self, and he's looking out at all the writers, and, almost all those guys had covered him at some point during his career. And so he said at one point, he says, geez, I look out here and I see a lot of friendly faces. I'm sad about what happened, but he said, I don't know that I hurt anyone. And I just happened to be, by luck, Kevin, standing next to Roger Angel from the New Yorker. So I was right next to him, and Roger Angel said under his breath, as soon as Pete Rose said that, Pete says, I don't know who I hurt. And Roger Angel says, baseball. And as a writer, I thought, that's going in my story.
Well, thank you. That was really interesting.
Can you repeat the answer? I didn't hear it.
Roger Angel said, Pete said, I don't know who I hurt. And then Roger Angel said, baseball.
Got it.
And I just thought, boy, that's a succinct answer if I ever heard one. Any other questions from anyone about anything that we talked about? I thought I'd get some of the Yankee fans here riled about Whitey Ford, but I guess not.
Mark's raising his hand.
Yes, Mark.
You need to unmute.
Oh, okay.
Okay, good. I recall reading something. Christy Mathewson wrote a book, I guess around the 11, the 12, those years. And
Yes.
in it, he mentioned how at Polo Grounds that there was a wire that went from, like, he referencing what you said about him saying he never gambled. It never, baseball couldn't be games couldn't be thrown. And he wrote about a wire that went from the Polo Grounds scoreboard to the third base coach. Is it? I don't have the name of the book in front of me. So, is that anything that you've heard of?
Yeah, I think it might be Pitching in a Pinch. I know that
Sounds
was one of
familiar.
the,
Sounds familiar.
yeah, that was one of the books that he wrote. And, he was quite a literate guy, and he wrote several books for teenagers, those kinds of things. I never read anything, though, where he really addressed the whole gambling issue. That was such a shock to me, when I watched that YouTube special, and here's, his roommate. I mean, a guy who ought to know him better than anybody, because they roomed together in those days, and, oh, he loved to gamble. He would always have $1,000. I mean, that's a lot of money, Mark, back then,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's a lot of dough. I mean, that's a lot of dough to us now.
Yeah, to take to a baseball game and gamble on it.
Yeah,
But John, I had another couple of things with Whitey Ford and why he didn't pitch as many games in Fenway. I think you made that comment. You said so much,
Yes.
said so many interesting things. Like just
thank
couldn't
you.
scribble them down enough. But a left-handed pitcher in Fenway, it made sense to avoid him pitching, even though Williams is a
Yeah,
lefty.
there's some truth to that, but Sam McDowell pitched in Fenway, Ron Guidry pitched in Fenway,
Right.
Mickey Lolich pitched in Fenway. I mean, there are a lot of left-handers in the league that pitch there.
You take a manager like Stengel, who was, as you said, very cautious, and many people said that they're very cautious about Ford. And you throw into the mix that he didn't pitch in the seventh games. Well, that's a different subject. That's what I thought that may have been a reason. And with Ford, and I'm not a Yankee fan. I'm the opposite. What's the opposite of a Yankee fan?
A good person.
I don't know how
Just
good I
kidding,
am.
I'm just
I don't know how
kidding.
good I am, but I'm a
I
Met
grew
fan.
up in
That's
New
the
England.
opposite.
I'm a Red Sox fan.
We like Red Sox fans once in a while. Once in a while, we like Red Sox
That
fans.
was good.
But Ford, in all the game sevens in 56, 57, 50, 58, 55, I don't know, 52 or 53. One of them was a 7-game, and he never to have pitched in a seventh game. It's really astounding that
It is.
you have to really look at none of the races are probably close. Maybe I'm wrong, but most of the time the Yankees won by a good deal. So Stengel could arrange his pitchers. You just had this 7-game series. He could do 1-4-7, and unless it's a Don Newcomb who always got killed by the Yankees. Even Sal Magli in 56, he pitched game 1, and he came back and pitched in game 5 against a Larson, and then he was done. So
that's usually the way they do it. Like Matheson pitched 3 times, Bob Gibson pitched 3 times. If you've got a stud like that, that's generally what you do.
And even the year when Burdette and Spahn were on the same team, Burdette pitched at 3 games, not Spahn. But that's interesting into the mix of protecting Whitey Ford. And when Whitey had his first superstar year was 61, and that year he had Luis Arroyo, was an incredible relief pitcher, had the one spectacular year in 1961, and Ford happened to have his best year. And I don't think did he ever win 20 games again after that year?
Yeah, he did. He won 20 games twice. I think that might have been the year he had 25 wins, and he had a
61
bunch
was
of
the
them.
big year.
He had a bunch of them by the All-Star break, and there was an article that I quote in my book that was in Sports Illustrated. Will he win 30? And when you think about it, 236 wins is impressive. Certainly, especially these days. I don't know if we'll see anybody win that many games. But the Yankees were kicking the bejesus out of everybody.
Right. No races.
And I mean, 30 starts, 27 starts, 34 starts. Why wouldn't you start him, even if it wasn't Fenway Park? I mean, that was a surprise to me. I thought, the 236 wins is great, but the team he was on, why wouldn't he win 300?
What was his record against the Yankees? Do you recall? What was his one lost record against Boston? Whitey Ford's record against Boston.
He was one game ahead. I think he was 14.
Just over 500.
Something like that. Yeah.
Right.
But like I said, a 6 CRA in Fenway. And I think there were 3 or 4 different seasons. He didn't even pitch a single game in Fenway. Casey would pitch him at Yankee Stadium, maybe once or twice against the Red Sox during a year. But
it's almost the opposite of Frank Larry.
Yeah.
Against the Yankees. Look, the exact opposite. Pitch him every chance you get because he's going to win. And I don't think there was any pitcher that it was almost a psychological thing that Frank Larry's going to pitch, and that means watch out. We're going to, even though the Yankees had one of the greatest, talk about that powerful team in the '60s.
Yeah,
there's a lot of great stuff in your book. I'm looking forward to reading.
Oh, thank you. I think it's one of the books that I was a sports writer for 25 years. I had my baseball writer's card one year when I was in Detroit. My son, as I mentioned, made it to the big league. So I've been watching baseball pretty much, for a lot of years. He's 32 now. But I've never read this stuff. And that was the thing that fascinated me. Once I started, I was like, I didn't know Stan Musial had that many at-bats against.
That's pretty amazing. Well, you're talking 22 games.
Yeah.
22 games against every team. That's like a different world.
And, and it was fun, looking at how some of these guys did against great pitchers. Like Pete Rose had, hold on a second, I'll tell you exactly. Pete Rose against all Hall of Fame pitchers had just incredible numbers. Hold on here, get it for you. Pete Rose hit over 300 against, I think it was 7 or 8 Hall of Famers. Bob Gibson, Juan Marichal, the cream of the crop.
Right.
All these guys, Don Sutton, Sandy Koufax. I mean, he hit over 300 against them. And then, you look at some guys like Musial, in fact, and Hank Aaron hit well over 300 against Koufax. Musial 342, Aaron 362.
Lifetime career 360.
Yeah.
Wow.
Willie Stargell 083 against Koufax.
Right.
Rico Cardi, do you remember him?
Sure. 341 year or 350.
000 against Koufax.
How many at bats?
I think 20.
Wow.
20 at bats. Did you know about a guy named Frank DePino?
No.
Tony Gwynn couldn't hit him to save his life. He batted 050 against him.
No, it's funny you talk about pitchers versus specific hitters. Ed Kranepool, I asked him at one time, who are the toughest pitchers? He was 17 years. And he was there during the Spahn and Marichal and Koufax and Drysdale.
The big leagues, I think, at 18, wasn't it?
17 is when he came up with the Mets in 62, 17.
Yeah.
And Kranepool, I asked him who were the toughest pitchers, and he said those guys were all impossible, but he could deal with them. He said Koufax, when he didn't come sidearm, he came over the top, so he managed against these guys. Right. But the toughest pitcher for him was Phil Niekro, which was because of knuckleball. And if Niekro was pitching, that was the scariest thing. So after I finished speaking to him, I went there, looked it up. He could find anything, and I found a game where he hit a 3-run homer off Phil Niekro.
Wow!
So I sent him a note saying, you hit a 3-run homer off Niekro, and I gave him the particular date, and he said that must have been the only time he didn't throw me a knuckleball.
Yeah, Pete Rose did really well against the Niekro brothers. He said, "I wish they were triplets."
That's funny.
Well, there's a lot of, it's just a lot of stuff like that in the book. I mean, I have a chapter on anomalies. Like you all know, the great Roger Hornsby, 358 lifetime average. There was a guy named Ben Cartwell, who I'd never heard of, who held him to a 130 average. And he wasn't a hard thrower. He was 4-25 one season for the Boston Braves. Just a 500 pitcher. But, he couldn't hit him.
You said something else that was, and I didn't write it down. Just like I said, so much. You talked about the end of careers and the last at bats, and you had a number of players up there, and just looking at it, and the way you phrase Cy Young, old and was released. That's what got me. Cy Young was released. How could Cy Young have been released? And you mentioned a couple of other things about the other players who had wonderful, wonderful careers, but it's the whole lifespan, and you wonder how many of them just wound up selling their autographs just to survive and to. That was
there's a lot of them that really struggled. The last chapter in the book is an interview with my friend Jim Gosger, who was a marginal player for the A's and the Red Sox and the Mets and the Expos and the Seattle Pilots. He figures prominently in Ball 4. And I got to know him when I worked in Port Huron, Michigan. And after he got done playing, he worked for the city. So you'd see him coming out of a manhole.
Right.
This guy was a big nigger. Wow. The most money he ever made in a season was $35,000. And think about what these guys make now. Juan Soto makes $35,000. Going and getting a drink in the cooler probably, and running out to his position.
Right.
The game has just changed so much. The anomalies chapter is an interesting one because there's always somebody that can get you out. Like Joe DiMaggio, great hitter, couldn't hit Billy Pierce. Left-handed pitcher too, but he just couldn't hit him. He had like a barely 200 average against him. Even Ted Williams. There was a guy named Jim Wilson who was a 500 pitcher. And I think Williams got 2 hits on him the last time he faced him to get his average to 200.
Wow.
It's fun. I mean, if you like baseball, the little tidbits that are in the book, I hope anyway, are just fun to read. And to me, it was a surprise on every page. The guy, Jack Perconte, do you remember him? Played in the big leagues? Played for the Indians.
No.
He read a copy of the book, and he said, it was like a mystery. He said there was a surprise on every page. And if that's the case, that's great. That's what you hope as a writer. You want to keep your readers going.
Right.
Thank you so much for your really good questions.
Thanks again for.
You're welcome.
I'm going to find a book. Run over to Barnes and Noble if I can find one in Staten Island. It used to be a great Staten Island Barnes and Noble. No more. I'll find one.
Well,
Thanks again, John. Thank
Kevin
you.
said there was some place that he found where they were, so he could probably help you out.
Well, I saw it online on Barnes and Noble, and it automatically knew my zip code and said it was in the store, in stock, but I haven't physically gone and looked. But yeah, it's definitely available on Amazon also.
Sure. Any other questions from anybody?
John, in the chat, Craig Garrettson asked, did you come across a bad player who had tremendous numbers against a great player?
Yeah, there were some that were surprising. I think we all remember how great Pedro Martinez was. You remember Craig Jeffries? Anybody remember Craig Jeffries? Pretty good hitter, played for the Mets, played for a couple different teams. He wore Pedro out. He had something like 460 against him. So there were all kinds of things like that. Ron Guidry, for example, owned Rod Carew. Rod Carew couldn't hit him with a paddle. So that was fun, just kind of looking through, who got these guys out? Somebody got them out, who was them? And every player had, somebody. DiMaggio, for example, against Satchel Paige. And Satchel Paige was in his 40s when he made it to the big leagues. And DiMaggio was 0 for 8 against him. So you just never know. But geez, I thank everybody so much. It was really a lot of fun. And I mentioned at the end there about my Substack, John Nogowski at substack.com. It's free. I've got all kinds of posts on there. Some are about baseball, not all of them, but I'd love to, carry this on. If you have any other questions or any other comments or like that, I appreciate it. And thanks for your attention. And Kevin, thanks for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much on behalf of the chapter. And when we post the link to your video, I'll make sure to include a link to that Substack.
That'd be wonderful. That'd be wonderful. Once again, thank you, everybody. And
thank you.
Thank
go
you.
Red Sox.
Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
You too.
Bye-bye.